share in either wisdom, story, or logic, and it's clearly amazing to hear all the differing missing links discovered by people unique to their own journeys, and in how they have come to discover them. Together, we can help to build a bigger picture for a better future, for a brighter tomorrow. Let's stand united. Let's remove the veils, and let's create a new world together. Are you that missing link? Join Jesse Hale on the Missing Link Talk Show as he helps to unveil the mystery through the unique wisdom and store of others.
Welcome everybody here back to the Missing Link. Today we're excited to have back, I think for the third or fourth time, someone who was part of, he was an analyst, writer. He's co-founder of GAPA, Independent Group of Analytical Psychology, at which he was president. His grandfather was a senator. A Sicilian politician who was also known for his...
But that was my father, who was the president of GAPA.
Your father, yeah. Sorry, I've been having some technical difficulties here, some computer issues. You were a DJ, producer, and you were, involved with the Illuminati, and, you got out of it. You saw some really weird stuff you didn't want to be a part of, so you've been writing about them and exposing them ever since. So welcome back to the Missing Link. Leo Lion Zagami. How are you doing today, brother?
Thank you very much for having me on the Missing Link. It's always a pleasure. And for those who don't know me, I'm an author, a investigative journalist that has also had a past experience, as you said, in the secret society we commonly refer to as the Illuminati. And for that reason, I dedicated a whole series to this subject, a vast series. Now we are at volume 11. The last time we talked, I think we were at volume 10, which regarded Islamic Freemasonry and the eternal conflict in the Middle East, while instead the last book tackles the subject of mind control, which has always been of great importance to me, also because my father, that you mentioned just a moment ago, he actually worked in Paris during the 1960s in a sub-project of MK Ultra. So he had a direct experience in that as a psychiatrist. And later on, he walked out of the academic world in disgust in the middle of the 70s when he saw the political use of psychiatry, which didn't happen only in the Soviet Union, as they claim, but also, unfortunately, here in the West and even in the United States and in Canada, especially. This book has a whole chapter dedicated to Canada, because Canada has been a laboratory for the New World Order in the realm of mind control since the experiments, the vicious criminal experiments, I would say, that were conducted by MK Ultra in Canada, as well as the more latest ones that were confirmed by the Ottawa citizen. I'm talking about the cognitive warfare that was instigated during the pandemic. So we are talking about a country that has seen very closely and lived on their own back this whole thing. And I'm sorry to say that there has not really been any legal results from those cases that were, of course, made against a foreign state, because Canada was subject to experiments that were actually conducted by a foreign state, the United States of America. And at the same time, in the end, we can say that this whole mind control business affects all of us. It's not a question of where you live around the world. At the moment, we are all subject, even the United States. You see, I say even the United States because there used to be a law that protected the United States citizens from mind control and psychological operations that was inaugurated, was passed in the second half of the 1940s, just after the Second World War, after the terrible experience with Nazism, with, of course, also viewing the threat of the Soviet Union ahead that gave birth to the Cold War. That really is what instigated eventually the birth of the various projects that developed Bluebird, Artichoke, and all the rest, and then finally manifested in what we know as MK Ultra. My book is a book based on not only on direct experiences, of course, thanks to my father, the experience that I had, but also direct experiences as somebody who was persecuted in Europe and internated by the Tavistock Institute by a professor, Giuseppe Nicolò, with at the end forcing me to leave my country and even renouncing to my own citizenship to be protected here in the United States of America, as you know, where I moved in 2019. I'm half English, half Italian, English and Scottish, and Italian. I come from an aristocratic background, and this is my story. So I gave you a brief introduction, as usual, Jesse.
You mentioned the mind control, and I think the word government comes from gubermente, meaning mind control. So how does this, Illuminati or this New World Order, work with the government, to, create this mind control over the people?
That will be social engineering as we know it today. But before getting into this subject, I would also like to say that in my book, I analyze also the mind control that the Illuminati and the Freemasons do on their own. I mean, because it's the first book that actually covers this subject that is not tackled by anybody. How do they control these people after having initiated them in these secret societies? And this is part, let's say, of this book. But then you, of course, ask me how these governments control, and this is a very important question you made me, and I think it's excellent that we can start from chapter 1, let's say, because this is where it's heading to. Governments have always known about mind control, but the first form of mind control was, of course, practiced within the field of military warfare, of military combat. We can see traces of the first form of mind control used as a psychological operation during a war in the famous military treaty, The Art of War of Sun Tzu. That is regarded as really the start point, not only for, of course, the art of war, as we all know. There is 2 texts that every officer in the world has to study, regardless of which country they belong to and they have done an oath to. I'm talking about The Art of War of Sun Tzu, and the other one is, of course, the De Bello Gallicum of Julius Caesar. These are treatises that explain how to use not only, though, especially in The Art of War, not only traditional means, using the usual weapons that you have at your disposal, but also instigating psychological terror on your adversary, trying to also push towards them a certain dose of disinformation. In my book, I explain, for example, how this worked out very well, even for Genghis Khan. We talk about Genghis Khan, this great figure that made the Mongolians conquer half of the world, or at least all of the known world back then, or almost all of it, was conquered by these people that came from the middle of nowhere, but they had understood really the art of war. And so when you understand the art of war and you arrive to conquer a town, what do, these people? What did they used to do, these Mongolians? They used to send some people in disguise to describe the fearless army that was about to invade them, how they would be, their women would be raped, how they would be murdered, they would be slaughtered. This already sets the psychological level of the war. You see, they're not there yet, but there is almost a preparation. Napoleon, in fact, said that he got more results from the actual marching of his soldiers than from the battles themselves. I mean, the actual noise of the march. But also, when it came to Genghis Khan, for example, these people were very much capable of using the art of illusion, a little bit like an illusionist today that goes on stage and of course plays around with cards or takes around rabbits out of hats and things. This is illusion, no? It's illusion. But the illusion can be also set up during a war, like eluding the enemy that you have 10 times the amount of soldiers. Genghis Khan will arrive with his army and they will say, wow, they will go, like I said, they will send these people in disguise and they will say, he has 1 million strong army. Maybe he had only 100,000, maybe he had only 10,000. So you understand, this is about setting the mind of the person you're about to fight and instigate that terror. That is a psychological operation. And so the first psyops are, let's say, the first psyop teaching in history is ascribed to Sun Tzu. But from that moment onwards, there were many that, of course, understood the importance of this art of war. And Napoleon, like I said, he said, I want to quote what he said, I have destroyed the enemy merely by marches. Never has such a victory been achieved at a lower price. This is what Napoleon said. And then there is the understanding of other forms of mind control, even more insidious, like hypnosis. And hypnosis initially was called animal magnetism. And when in 1776, of course, we all know this great nation, the United States of America, was formed, the first person who was investigating mind control was actually Benjamin Franklin. He was given this task by his early government of the United States to investigate this whole thing. And of course, Benjamin Franklin, we know he had a vast experience not only as a statesman, as a diplomat, but also as a Freemason. He had been involved in certain lodges of Freemasons, and he had been involved with one of the biggest hypnotists of his time, Count Cagliostro, Giuseppe Balsamo, known also as Alessandro Count Cagliostro. Now, this Count Cagliostro, who is regarded as one of the Grand Masters of the Illuminati, together with Franz Anton Mesmer, who gives the words to mesmerism, that is the early form of hypnotism, animal magnetism, were the ones who were actually starting to codify for the first time what will evolve in the present day hypnotism or mentalism, because today we have all these people that call themselves mentalists and they program people maybe by using various techniques, which are, of course, hypnotism, what we know as neuro-linguistic programming today. But everything was, of course, coming from a much older tradition. Now, what is this animal magnetism? There's some people who have animal magnetism, some people who don't have any animal magnetism, of course. There is some people who go into a room and immediately draw the attention of everybody else, because animal magnetism is something that you either have or you don't have, but you can also build inside you. And there is certain techniques to do that. Of course, the early form of magnetism that were practiced by people like Mesmer were also emerged in the theatrality of the time. So they would like to use all kinds of equipment that maybe in the end it wasn't really necessary. Cagliostro, though, Count Cagliostro was instead one of those early hypnotists who only used the power of the eye. And in fact, in my latest book, I talk about a movie that came out in 1949. I don't know if you ever saw this movie. It's called Black Magic. You can find it very easily on YouTube. It's a movie by Orson Welles. Now, Orson Welles, the protagonist of this movie, gives also a fictional account of a meeting between Mesmer and Cagliostro in this movie. But it is in this movie that I will invite all of you to see, which we see the historically significant early use of hypnotism when Cagliostro arrives to the French court and he's there with the symbol of Freemasonry in his hat, the compass and the square. He has these hypnotic eyes, Orson Welles. And the people in the court, they deride him. They make a mockery of him by pretending to be some sick people that needed help from Cagliostro. But then they get up and say, you're a charlatan. At that point, you can see in the movie in question, Cagliostro becomes very serious and says, like, I can give, I can take from you. And he immediately blocks them, hypnotizes them, frees them. And at that point, they are terrorized. So hypnosis is definitely very important. And for that reason, in the early 50s, when MK Ultra will be eventually materializing within what we know is the Central Intelligence Agency, MK Ultra means manufacturing killers utilizing lethal tradecraft requiring assassination. This is what it actually means. Now, it didn't last many years, but it lasted enough to bring, let's say, the genie out of the bottle of mind control. It lasted from 1952 to 1972. There is no MK Ultra after. So at times, let's say, since the birth of the internet, we tended to talk about mind control referring to MK Ultra in an erroneous way, because in reality, formally speaking, there is no such thing as MK Ultra after 1972. There is, though, other programs, which I discuss profusely in volume 11. There is other projects that get instigated. Why did MK Ultra retire from the, with this great announcement that was made, I think, by first exposing the whole thing, I think maybe on the New York Times, I don't remember, but in 1974, then it was officially, it was made public that this program existed with all its sub-projects in 1975. A commission was created. Actually, I think there were two different commissions that were created. There was an investigation. There was exposure of everything that happened. But at that point, the documents themselves had been destroyed because, of course, MK Ultra hides the killing of some very important people. In 1973, they decided to conveniently destroy all the ultra top secret reports. So we will never really know 100% everything about it. But why it was destroyed? Well, the CIA director of that time took advantage of the fact that there was the Watergate scandal. And because in the Watergate scandal, there were some people who had also been involved at very high levels with Project MK Ultra. And when I say Project MK Ultra, I'm talking about a bunch of sub-projects, over 160 that took place during that time. And so they decided to destroy every document. And now we, at times, like I say, we overly speculate about MK Ultra. You notice yourself how many guests maybe you had in your show that have mentioned MK Ultra, Jesse? How many?
Maybe 20, maybe more.
But what is the reality of it? Because you see, from hypotheses, conjectures, theses, but facts, I base my work on facts. This book has something like 481 footnotes of credible academic or otherwise sources that are confirmed. I'm not saying that people can talk about it and have their own experience referring to MK Ultra, because MK Ultra reality is not any longer what MK Ultra used to be. It's actually the results of those experiments that came out during those 30 years, which are still used by governments, by sects, by various institutions. So there is still I would call it, Jesse, a MK Ultra flavor. But let's talk about, for example, another controversial character that sometimes is wrongful in a wrong way associated to MK Ultra because he was somehow connected to it, but he became critical of it. I'm talking about the late Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino. Michael Aquino, we all know, it's almost a legend in the internet folklore of things. No, don't you think, Jesse? It's kind of well known, let's say, no?
Michael Aquino was the Church of Satan?
He was, of course, he became involved with the Church of Satan in 1968. What happened was that he was a member of a psychological operation battalion that was based at the time in San Francisco. And it will be actually from that psychological operation battalion that comes out a new concept that succeeds even more than what MK Ultra did. And that is Mind War. Mind War will become a new project that will then develop within NATO, and in the last, since the early 2000s up until now, it has developed into what we now call cognitive warfare. Only a couple of years ago, after let's say when the pandemic was fading out, in fact, NATO did a critical meeting of the cognitive warfare program in Canada, out of all places, because Canada is the place where, of course, like I said in this book, it's a mind control laboratory. And like I also stated earlier on, the United States used to have a defense towards mind control. Why I'm talking about defense? Because the politician understood that mind control was a thing that was becoming very dangerous and out of control. And for that reason, they instituted a law that will defend the American citizens, but will not defend the allies from the other countries. So, so people understand a little bit better what I'm talking here about, because it can always become a little bit confusing when I give many names and start talking about various things. There is various forms of mind control, and there is also brainwashing. The two things don't necessarily go along together, but at times they do. Mind control can be, like I said earlier, psychological operations, and that is PSYOPs. PSYOPs are different from MK Ultra, but often in let's say the world of the conspiracy world on the internet, the two things get confused. Maybe an artist gets accused of being an MK Ultra subject, when in reality he is simply used by a psychological operation battalion. Now, psychological operations are very important, and Michael Aquino was a guy who had worked within psychological operations from the Vietnam War. Psychological operations has three levels. There is the strategic, there is the operational, there is the tactical. These three levels of psychological operations are conducted to support the national security objectives. And all the allies of NATO refer to Fort Bragg as the most important, the fourth psychological operation battalion of Fort Bragg is the one, now I think it's called Fort Liberty, because they always change the names. As you know, they have these name changes. So now it's known as Fort Liberty, formerly Fort Bragg in North Carolina. That is the place where the 4th Psychological Operation Group Airborne has their headquarters. And that's where, for example, The Italian Psychological Operation Battalion goes and train the English one, the French one, and so on. However, the French, in the last few years, developed the mind war of Michael Aquino that he laid his foundations in the 1980s by visiting all the NATO bases in Europe. And this development resulted in the foundation and the creation by a French officer called François Clausel of a command center in Norfolk, Virginia. You can go and Google yourself, cognitive warfare, Google cognitive warfare, Norfolk, Virginia, François Clausel, and you will understand finally what I'm talking about. What is the difference between cognitive warfare and psychological operation? Why was Michael Aquino transforming psychological operation? Why this mind war became what is now known as cognitive warfare? Because psychological operations were born in a time in which we didn't have the internet. Aquino understood the potentiality of the internet. But of course, we are talking about 1980 when Michael Aquino published his first paper on mind war. When we have now social networks, data centers, and all that, you can do a new kind of mind war and a new kind of mind control. And it is not anymore the mind control that can, the psychological operation that you will hear on Voice of America abroad, maybe focused on Germany or France or Italy or whatever, and you are convincing the local populations of this and that through the media that they had back then, the radio, and then later on the television. Now we have the internet. And the internet gives you the possibility, after we have all given our own data to social media, to address personally Jesse's, for example, Jesse Hall. Okay, who is he? Okay, perfect. Now we can start with a cognitive warfare operation through the internet. You will simply put on the Facebook and start seeing things on the side that are addressed specifically to you because they want to enter into your brain. You go maybe in a specific setup and you will be victim of this cognitive warfare, but most of all through your computer, your phone. It's a completely new game. You can understand, Jesse, with this new kind of thing, because now the game is not only between humans, it's also between humans and the AI, which can be used to further bring the populations under control. So this is what I'm trying to talk about in my book, of course, The Past, Present, and Future of Mind Control, from Sun Tzu to MK Ultra and beyond. It's almost 300 pages. People will have to dig deep and they will find a lot of material that will probably inspire also future studies for whoever is interested. But I think it's important because we all use social networks. We all use the internet. We all have been, in a way, victims of the psychological operations that were conducted through Hollywood and the TV and the cinema in the 70s, 80s, 90s. I mean, the brainwashed leaders of today, I cite a couple: Emmanuel Macron, Justin Trudeau. These people were born and raised with brainwashing TV. They are the product of that TV. And at that time, like I explained in this book, the Frankfurt School, which was one of the outposts of the Illuminati that came here to the United States and worked closely with the intelligence services in Hollywood, knew exactly how to program people. So in the early days of Hollywood, there was, let's say, a direct connection between the professors, the experts of the mind, and the film directors and the producers. Then at one point, once the whole thing was set into motion, they didn't need to be there anymore, present. But imagine in the early days, when film studios will produce the big movies, there will be a direct involvement always of these mind controllers. So they will program then, of course, the people through these big movies, through their certain TV shows. They will, of course, push their own propaganda, their own agenda. As you know, I wrote also a book about Hollywood, the volume 8 of my confessions, so that is quite is very detailed about this. But in this book in particular, I explain where we are now also, where we are now, because things, like I said, thanks to technology, have changed. And at the same time, we have lived since 9/11 and the pandemic, the two biggest psychological operations on our own shoulders. I mean, you, me, everybody has been subject to a massive psychological operation on 9/11. Regardless of who did it, and you know that I wrote a whole book, volume 10, to explain how Islam collaborates, the Islamic Illuminati with the Western Illuminati and all that. Regardless of who has done that, it changed forever the psychology of every single Westerner and American in particular. But everybody in the West, from Europe to Canada to America, to everywhere in the world. The world changes because they saw something they never saw before. And it affected their psyche. And who benefit from it? The military-industrial complex. Who benefit from the pandemic?
Same thing, military-industrial complex.
And the number one partners.
Pharmaceuticals, the pharmaceutical industry,
yes.
But they are the ones who actually are running same type of thing, because it seems like when the Nazis came in from, Germany in the 40s and 50s, they created NASA, they created the CIA, they created the pharmaceutical, they became head of the pharmaceutical companies, and it's all under the same military-industrial complex. It seems to be running all of that. Their Department of Energy is all national security. Why no one can come out with anything free energy, because it goes against national security when it comes to them controlling even energy, because the US dollar goes on the petrodollar, and anything that challenges the petrodollar now becomes a threat to the USA. So basically all of it runs under the pharmaceutical industry, and they're the ones who gave the military-industrial complex gave Moderna and all these other places the actual code to create these injections. It came from the military-industrial complex.
Well, as you know, I was a Freemason, and I was initiated in various lodges. One of them was Kirby Lodge 2818, which was actually connected directly to the big pharma. And so there is lodges that are connected to the big pharma, others that are connected to the military-industrial complex. They work hand in hand because banks make, the big bank cartels, the Sabatian Frankists that own the banking system, they make their money through big pharma and through military-industrial complex. I mean, when you are sending millions, when you're sending people to war and they come back traumatized, what do they do? They give them pharmaceutical compounds. They give them psychoactive drugs. That's it. So there is a win-win here, always, for the big pharma and the military-industrial complex to go hand in hand. But like I said in my book in volume 11, if 9/11 was particularly important for the military-industrial complex for their wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and so on, that have not produced anything positive for the United States. In the end, we left more than $1 billion of weapons in Afghanistan, and like cowards were left because of Joe Biden, even leaving a strategical outpost that was next to China. But regardless of that, the pandemic gave the big pharma the possibility of doing exactly the same, resetting the human system, hijacking the human system. And so we are now viewing, of course, the result of these massive psychological operations, which in reality become operation of social engineering. Social engineering is today very important, and social engineering, hacking the individual, the weaponization of brain sciences. This is what some of my book is about. And the home of all psychological operations and weaponization of brain sciences is, of course, in England, the Tavistock Institute. Prior to becoming the Tavistock Institute in 1947, because of the NHS, it was the Tavistock Clinic. And this was a very important place for certain experiments that were conducted by the Allied forces during the Second World War. So the Tavistock Institute is for me particularly relevant because I suffered a direct attack by them. And it's testified by my own lawyer, because when I participated in Italy to the Pitchfork insurrection, and I was very political, and it became very dangerous for me, they came, they locked me up, and this professor in front of my lawyer said, I represented the Tavistock Institute in Italy. My name is Professor Giuseppe Nicolò, and you can go and check, and you will find this name, and you will find the link with the Tavistock Institute and with the Vatican. The Tavistock Institute has even an office in Italy. And in fact, the Tavistock Institute office in Italy is in the back room of a bank in Florence. So the Tavistock Institute is the one that after the Second World War sent people like Aldous Huxley to America to work for Project MK Ultra, Program MK Ultra in the 1950s, because their fixation was that hypnosis, together with drugs, in particular LSD, will brainwash people and will actually help interrogations, help in maybe programming the perfect assassin. They had a lot of expectations regarding lysergic acid, regarding LSD. So my father was involved in that, was involved in the experimentation of LSD at in Paris. I explain in my book how. And these experiments, he described them to me, like, for example, he told me like 5 people will take LSD and 1 person will not take LSD. And then they will have to identify who took LSD and who didn't take LSD. And at the same time, they had a special substance that they used to use for emergency in case the LSD went a little bit too, the effect was too strong. They would take this substance, which is usually used to as a as a tranquilizer for horses. So it's pretty hard stuff.
Yeah, ketamine. It's called ketamine. Special K is the horse tranquilizer.
Not that.
No?
This is a different substance that was used. I think it was called aldoline. It was a different substance. I know what you're talking about because, of course, that is another of these drugs that unfortunately is used. But remember that out of all these drugs, in the end, even Timothy Leary, who was himself pushing for LSD and became the guru of LSD worldwide, he said the internet will be much more powerful than LSD. And I met Timothy Leary in the early 1990s in London. And Timothy Leary claimed to be the successor of Aleister Crowley. He actually said that. He said, I'm continuing the work of Aleister Crowley. So what is Aleister Crowley doing in all this? Because people say that Aleister Crowley is always appearing here and there and everywhere when we're talking about various subjects. Well, Aleister Crowley initiated Aldous Huxley to the use of psychedelic substances. He initiated him to magic and to the Illuminati in the real sense of the term. In Germany, it took place this initiation. And Aleister Crowley was not only a magician, you see. He was a little, this is not really, not so known, let's say, because Aldous Huxley, we know, connected with Aleister Crowley, but not many people like to talk about it. But at the same time, connected with Aleister Crowley, after Aleister Crowley, he basically met with Aleister Crowley in Berlin in Germany in 1930. But Crowley had already done an experiment, a secret experiment for the government in the field of mind control before he met Huxley. That experiment was conducted in his own Abbey of Thelema in Sicily. Abbey of Thelema is often referred to as this monastery of the Satanists, where Aleister Crowley brought all his disciples and practiced magic, sex, drugs, everything. You know, you have these images on the wall, drink out of my satanic brain, do cocaine, all kinds of excesses, you know. There was incredible deprivation, but it was also mind control. And once I talked with the son of one of the people who was there in the Abbey of Thelema with Crowley, and he told me that Crowley himself was full of cats because it was prohibited in the Abbey to say I. You couldn't build in any way your ego, and if you did, you had to cut yourself. So even Crowley was full of cats. And it was an experiment. It was a mind control experiment. It was not only magic. Magic was a way to cover up a lot of all this, because the academic world wanted to know from Crowley what would these people will do under the influence of certain drugs. And Crowley was very methodical. For those who know the work of Aleister Crowley, Crowley was very methodical about keeping diaries on each of his disciples, on all the various so-called magical experiments he was conducting. And so the English intelligence, who always utilized Crowley, also utilized his presence in this abbey, where eventually he would be kicked out by Mussolini. And that it was 7 years. Let's say that Crowley ended up also in a big scandal because there was the sudden death of this 23-year-old Raoul Loveday, whose wife blamed his death on the participation in one of Crowley's satanic rituals. But in the early 1920s, apart from inspiring the British tabloid that wrote Crowley was the wickedest man in the world, and everybody knows about that because it became quite famous, this whole thing. There was the experimentation that people don't know about. The fact that Crowley was not only about magic, it was also about mind control. In fact, in the initiation in the Ordo Templi Orientis, in the first degree, I describe it here in this book, you have, and I remember myself when I was initiated into the OTO, this was something that kind of triggered my attention. It was specifically said to you in the initiation, you are not allowed any longer to be a subject of hypnosis in any way, shape, or form if you enter basically the Illuminati. So you see, Jess, there is actually a warning there. There is actually you might be subject to the hypnosis by your grandmaster or your worshipful master or the people controlling the order, but you are not allowed anymore to put yourself in the hands of anybody else because you might betray the order if you are hypnotized. So it was particularly relevant for Crowley to actually, when he rewrote, because I don't know if you know the history of the Ordo Templi Orientis, the order, the OTO, wasn't really born with Crowley. It was born with the Illuminati in Austria and Germany, Theodor Reuss and another chap in Austria. And in the first degree instructions of the OTO, Crowley writes something that has to be repeated by the candidate and says, I most solemnly promise and swear that I will not indulge unduly in any drug, such as alcohol, ether, opium, hashish, or cocaine, whereby my full consciousness and free will might be impaired. I do most solemnly promise and swear that I will not allow myself to fall unduly under the influence of any person whereby my free will might be impaired. This was like very clear, and people would say, but how can somebody like Aleister Crowley, who had a place full of deprivation, filled of drugs and stuff, order to people through their initiation to do exactly the opposite? Because you could only do those things if Crowley allowed you to. So I think that people will have a great time reading in this book also these secrets that maybe not anybody, I don't know, people, maybe some of your audience has had a direct experience in the OTO, but if they had a direct experience in the OTO, they know very well that this kind of orders require, like most sects in the Illuminati, total obedience. And in fact, the subject of total obedience is a subject which I tackle very much in the chapter 5 of this book, because I explain how even the Freemasons operate a certain degree of mind control on the initiate. That's why the initiate, after he's initiated, he is loyal to that order. And the same for the OTO, which is a paramasonic order, which Crowley, of course, took over, but was born within the milieu of Theosophy and Freemasonry. So I think that the mind control that we have discussed up until now can be also, we could, for example, talk about Charles Manson. Charles Manson was a mind controller. It was somebody who was very knowledgeable about hypnotism.
Well, he went through the MK Ultra program, so he was MK Ultra'd, and then he was able to come out of the actual programming to go and control other people. So he was officially in that program.
Now, in my book, I mention him mainly because when he was in jail, people like Danny Trejo, that we know is still alive and kicking, is an American actor, very well known. He had a direct experience with Charles Manson hypnotizing. And we also know that, and I explain in other of my books, that Charles Manson was initiated in the Ordo Templi Orientis, in the Solar Renegade, so-called Renegade Lodge of the OTO, called the Solar Lodge here in Southern California. We know that that lodge was connected also with people within the CIA. So definitely there is a connection there with what you're calling MK Ultra, because in those days, everything within the sectarian world or the New Age, the rising New Age, was all controlled by the people within the CIA operating with MK Ultra, because MK Ultra was not about only, there were all these sub-projects. And of course, all these sub-projects, within these sub-projects, there was the use of magic. There was the use not only of hypnotism, but also the use of magic, because magic, or the esoteric or the occult or Satanism itself, is related to hypnotism. Symbols can be related to hypnotism. Certain symbols can actually draw your attention and draw you towards being hypnotized. In this book, I talk about, I refer to the experience of a famous Italian psychologist who himself got to experience. He basically, what he did was that he wanted to study methods of hypnotism that were more advanced than the present one. So what he did, suddenly in the 70s, he ended up in a black mass. And in a black mass, he saw the level of control that the people, were subject to. And he wanted to somehow adopt that level of control. And his name is Stefano Benemeglio. He was born in 1945. He's still active, and he created what is known as dynamic hypnosis. So let's say that in the same period that MK Ultra was developing in America and also abroad, Stefano Benemeglio, who was this Italian psychologist, hypnologist, researcher, and professor of what became dynamic hypnosis and analogic communication, went to a black mass in search of his answers on human behavior to study the mechanism of hypnosis even further. And then he opened what is now known is actually, there is an institute in Milan that he directs. Of course, people don't refer to Stefano Benemeglio as a Satanist, but as an academic who is working with. But the guy actually wrote in a book that he published in Italy that he took his experience from a black mass, and he's very detailed about his description of the black mass, the use of music, of drums, for example. You see, from the very beginning, also, when it came to mesmerism, and then the development that that became hypnosis, they understood that also music can be used for hypnotizing people, and drums, particularly, you see, also in voodoo, you have drums. And the drumming, it brings you in a state of hypnosis very easily. So music, and also music can bring you in a state of, that's why I wrote a book, volume 8, dedicated to the entertainment world, because of course music has always been linked somehow to mind control, propaganda, all kinds of things. Now,
trance music, think of trance, putting you in a trance. It gets you into that state where you're, susceptible to this mind control.
Yeah, trance, for example, connected specifically to the use, for example, of LSD and MDMA, that kind of drug, especially because it was actually a drug that was spread by the intelligence services, in particular Mossad. That's why trance became very big in Israel. And in fact, on the 7th of November, where is it that those terrorists went to attack? In a place where people were basically listening to trance, and they were in a state of trance. And it was very easy for them to attack those people, kidnap them, and create chaos in the way that they did, in an unprecedented way. Now it's obvious that somebody let that happen, because you don't do a trance festival only a few kilometers from Gaza and you don't have any security that can block. I mean, it was just obvious that they let it happen. So in regards to Benemeglio that I was discussing, this guy who is a Satanist and as well as a master in hypnosis in Italy, codifying what he calls analogic communication. Analogic communication was also a fixation of my father, who, as you know, was a psychiatrist, so he studied very much this whole thing about analogic communication. But it is about the symbols. Benemeglio, when he went to his first black mass, he describes how the whole ambience was kind of totally focused on the altar, and on the arrival of the satanic master sitting on the throne, a little bit like we see in Eyes Wide Shut. We see this figure and everybody moving in a ritual way. And so I think that people need to understand the symbol that, for example, was devised by Anton LaVey. Anton LaVey devised that pentagram with the Baphomet as a symbol of his Church of Satan that was founded in 1966. In 1968, during the screening of Rosemary's Baby, Michael Aquino meets for the first time Anton LaVey because he was out and about in San Francisco, where the 7th Battalion of the Psychological Operations were at the time residing. They are no longer there. They moved to another town here, always in California. And of course, they familiarized by watching Rosemary's Baby, I mean, which is a movie that, as we know, was actually from Roman Polanski, who himself was involved with the foundation of the Church of Satan and who Anton LaVey claims to have collaborated with for this movie, saying that the eyes that appear at one point on Rosemary's Baby are his eyes. But in any case, Michael Aquino understood that Anton LaVey, like many other people that were operating at that time with sects and cults and whatever in San Francisco, was operating also for MK Ultra, because MK Ultra initially was only for people abroad or for people, voluntaries within the military. From the early 50s, then they understood gradually that they wanted to also involve the general population unknowingly. And that's when they created Operation Midnight Climax. Operation Midnight Climax, I think, was founded in New York and then moved to San Francisco in this big mansion where they will create basically a trap where there will be cameras, microphones, and so on, so they could record the effects of the LSD, not only on the people who consciously took it for those experiments, but also on subjects that unknowingly were brought to take this drug. So the drugs that started to spread more and more in San Francisco eventually will create what we know, the summer of love, flower power, everybody, let's go to the streets of San Francisco. However, the effect was not really positive. San Francisco, how is San Francisco today, Jess? San Francisco today is a shithole.
Well, I remember hearing about before President Xi Jinping came to San Francisco, where they had him, I think it was last year, there was 40,000 homeless people all over the streets that they had to clean up. They put all on buses and they disappeared. So I never heard if those homeless people ever returned, but apparently, there was a lot of homeless people, and they had to get rid of 40,000 people there. Okay, so that way he didn't look and see all of these people all over the streets. They put them on buses and shipped them somewhere else, or who knows what they did with them. But that's what I heard about that.
Yeah, and that's very good thing that you are reminding people. Where are these homeless? Are they back in the streets or not? But how were they created in the first place? Mental health is the first issue that brings people to become homeless. And mental health is often triggered by the abuse of drugs. The fact that San Francisco was fueled with drugs in the 60s, it became like, from that moment onwards, that city was completely destabilized mentally. It became a laboratory for the CIA. The whole city became a laboratory for the CIA. And thank God that we didn't get the first Manchurian candidate president at these last elections, Kamala Harris, who is the product, is the mother of Kamala, worked, even collaborated with MK Ultra. So, I mean, direct collaboration in Canada also. So this is just a brief citation from Huxley given in San Francisco after moving to California from England in 1937. Quote, there will be in the next generation or so a pharmaceutical method of making people love their servitude and producing dictatorship without tears, so to speak, producing a kind of painless concentration camp for entire societies so that people will have their liberties taken away from them, but would rather enjoy it because they will be distracted from any desire rebelled by propaganda, brainwashing enhanced by pharmaceutical methods. And this seems to be the final revolution. These words by the guy who wrote The Doors of Perceptions, which in reality I rename The Gates of Hell. Because even Jim Morrison was the product of the military-industrial complex, as you know, as his father was one of them. And he himself called the group The Doors, inspired by Aldous Huxley. People thought, actually, when they read Aldous Huxley, wow, this guy is bringing me something that is liberating me. What idiots. I mean, the thing is that Huxley, George Orwell, all these people were from a milieu of people who knew exactly that what kind of mind control was being established from the moment onward. So going back to the first question you made, what is the connection between the government and mind control? The first connection that I state in my book that is known as a fact is the experiments of Pavlov. Pavlov, I don't know if you ever heard of Pavlov dogs. Pavlov is the first guy, really, the first guy that inspired in Russia the certain experiments by the use of his dogs initially. Then Vladimir Lenin came along and said, well, you know, your experiments seem pretty cool to us. Why don't we experiment on the whole of the Soviet Union population? Why don't we mind control the whole Soviet Union like you mind control your dogs? I will give you access to every hospital in Russia if you want. So that's how the first known mind control experiment towards the population was born. Pavlov's experiments on animals, then on mind control dogs, which are very well known even today in the academic world. He basically trained these dogs with a bell, with the certain, giving them food when he would do certain things, and then these dogs will automatically act. And Pavlov's dog psychological experiment is, I would say, the most important. We have, of course, various kind of theories and work that has been conducted in experimental psychology. The Russian school was definitely one of the most influential before even the Americans started with MK Ultra, with the experiments also conducted in liaison with Tavistock Institute. The early 20th century, it was all about Russia. I mean, in Russia, already in 1903, like I explained in volume 11, here, my new book about the history of mind control, in 1903, Vladimir Mekshev published a 7-volume report called Foundation of the Theory and Functions of the Brain. Very important book. Bershev is acknowledged as the founder of the Russian School of Neurology, and he called his procedures the study of reflexology. And it is actually their work on behaviorism that preceded even Vladimir Bershev's work, preceded the work of Ivan Pavlov. So this work led to all kinds of experiments that brought to also implants. Now, people think nowadays, oh, brain-computer interface implants are kind of, implants are something new. No, implants are not something new, because electrodes were put in the head almost 100 years ago already to trigger certain basic reactions. I'm not saying that you have the same effect as a brain-computer interface or as a microchip that controls your emotions in a specific sector of your brain. Today, we are at levels that are incredibly advanced. But the experiments go back a long time. So when the Manchurian Candidate novel came out at the end of the 1950s, this was a very important moment. But the Manchurian Candidate, as you know, is also a movie with none other than Frank Sinatra. And this movie was basically banned after the killing of JFK for 30 years. This movie is very interesting, but also is very revealing. But it doesn't tackle the subject of implants in the brain. However, in the Denzel Washington version, as you know, Jess, they show already back, because it came out a while ago now, the Denzel Washington version, they showed the brain implant and the guy acting like a robot, becoming a manufactured assassin. The Manchurian Candidate is one, of course, of the leading themes of my book, especially in connection to John F. Kennedy, because now, finally, with the arrival of Trump at the White House, and this book actually was read by the Trump team, and they invited me in Coachella to attend the event. And this was a great honor for me, I guess, for my modest show and for my modest, but apparently they liked very much the work I'm doing. And so they wanted me with Trump there at the Coachella. Me and my wife went, and it was a wonderful experience. There were over 100,000 people. But I talked in this book about Thomas Crooks as a Manchurian Candidate. I gave exact explanations why he is a Manchurian Candidate. The father and mother who are themselves therapeutes. The father and mother who have hardly been seen publicly. Only 2 times they have been filmed. The father and mother who went out on the 23rd of July and were filmed by Fox News Digital on the day Thomas Crooks was cremated. Because when at the beginning of August, the representatives of the Republican Party arrive in Butler, suddenly, there was no body to inspect. They had destroyed all evidence by cremating the body of Thomas Crooks, who attempted to assassinate Donald J. Trump on the 23rd of July. Donald J. Trump, the attempted assassination, as I explained in my book, was conducted on the 13th of July, during the same hours as this ritual was conducted at the Bohemian Grove. On the 13th of July, this ritual, cremation of care. And on the 23rd, the day, you know that the 23 is a number the Illuminati like very much. That was the day they cremated the guy who attempted to assassinate Donald J. Trump. But in this ritual, on the 13th of July, there was present the husband of Nancy Pelosi and all the military-industrial complex opposing Donald J. Trump, because they were hoping that he would be killed. And the second time they attempted to kill him, who was that attempted to kill him? A brainwashed idiot who was recruiting soldiers for Ukraine, who was himself the subject of cognitive warfare by NATO in a NATO recruiting center. So the intention is very clear. NATO wants to kill Donald J. Trump. They haven't managed. So it's important. Did you know about the disconnection? Yes?
No.
So these are facts. They're not fiction. They're not hypotheses. They're not speculations. These are facts. So Another fact. I show you something here, always from this book.
Quick question before you get on with that. Someone asked from your YouTube, Leo, is Vladimir Putin a member of the Illuminati?
Okay. The Illuminati have their eastern headquarters in Kazakhstan, in Astana. Where was Vladimir Putin delivering his important speech in the last few days? From Astana. The Illuminati exist worldwide. However, they are still not a unifying force that is able to put together their final plan to establish the one world religion. Because until Pope Francis is brought to Astana to meet with Kirill, the Patriarch of Moscow, they can't be this unification. And at the moment, as you see, there is a confrontation between the two forces. There is the Sino-Russian world order. So you have the Chinese Illuminati, the Russian Illuminati against the Western Illuminati. When we see this in the bigger picture, of course, we can see this as a squabble between different gangs of the same new world order, no? But who is going to win? It's like, I want to drive the Ferrari. You want to drive the Ferrari too. Then it's another guy, a Chinese, who wants to drive the Ferrari too. Who's going to drive this Ferrari? We all want to drive, and we are, we all have a, So the thing is Putin a guy we can trust? Putin is the head of a state that I met personally. I actually been in Russia many times. As a DJ, I was actually even given the opportunity to be the first and only DJ to ever play at the Bolshoi in Moscow. I was the first European after the end of the Soviet Union to be given the possibility to broadcast on a Russian national radio. I remember going to the studios in St. Petersburg, people with machine guns like this. It was pretty scary, man. And I worked for the Ministry of Culture in Russia for a long time, doing various things. My experience was positive. At the time, the relations were completely different between the Western world, because they were respecting the treaties and there wasn't any conflict between the various factions of the Illuminati. Then something happened. Something happened that has kind of broken this unity. I'm not saying that in the future they might find again this unity, but I think that Russia has understood that the Western Illuminati don't have that their plan is so evil, they didn't want this plan to be adopted in Russia. At the same time, we know that their past communist experience has somehow proven to them, with a living experiment that lasted various decades, that communism is evil. And communism is the first and most important ideology to come out of Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati. Let's not forget, like I wrote also in other books of mine, as you know, I have also volume 9 of my Confessions, where I discuss certain of the subjects, that the Illuminati themselves, it was actually Karl Marx who produced the Manifesto for the League of the Just, that was a product of Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati. So it's all connected. So saying, is there the Illuminati in Russia? Of course, there's Illuminati in Russia. There's actually the Freemasons in Russia also after the fall of the Soviet Union that started again. And there was also a form of Freemasonry that aided and helped Vladimir Lenin to rise to power. And it was the Grand Orient of France. So the involvement of the Illuminati is always there at all levels. I think that personally, we as Americans, and I'm glad to have become American this year, and I have renounced my European citizenship formally in the month of June for a specific reason, because Europe is an enslaved technocracy, and it could become a battlefield in the future if they don't stop what they're doing, because they are, Europe is fighting for their own identity, but at the same time, Russia wants a piece of it, China wants a piece of it, America already owns it. So there is no European identity. There is simply a continent which is trying to survive and find a direction. At the moment, I find Europe in a very dangerous position. Some people say, how is Leo Zagami still alive, being involved with all this, being an Illuminati, being a Freemason, being this and that and all the other? I have renounced to a lot. Maybe people don't know that in your show, so obviously I need to, maybe they haven't read my book, so maybe they need to have their minds refreshed by it. But I have not seen my son since 2008. My son was kidnapped, and like I wrote in volume 10 of my confessions, is in the hands of a member of the World Economic Forum. I give the names. I give, the guy lives now in Oslo. I'm not allowed to see him. I never spoke to him. He's now 18 years of age. I've dedicated this book to him in the hope he will one day read it. And that is one of the things they did to me. They tried to kill me. They poisoned me. They arrested me for espionage in Norway. Then they arrested me in Italy and they locked me up for the Tavistock Institute. I mean, how many things you can do to a man? I was forced to leave, as you know, Italy in May 2019, leave all my things I worked for a lifetime for, and come here and live in a small little apartment because I was risking to have my passport taken, and I would be arrested for what I wrote in my books, exposing the Vatican and their connections to the mafia, to the Italian government, and so on. So I think that this also explains to people that sometimes too easily say, but Leo Zagami, ha, 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 ho, ho, ho. The guy is making it up, or maybe this and no, guys, there is a lot of suffering behind my work. There's a lot of suffering and things that happen, unfortunately, that I would not wish to my worst enemy. I mean, being arrested for espionage in Norway was one of them, or not being allowed to ever see my son again, or having to discuss with the rest of my family, and because they were kind of scared that I was revealing too much, and so they threatened me from my own family. Just at the moment, I hardly talk with my mother. I don't talk with any other member of my family. So, aside from, of course, my wife, but this is to make you understand you are giving up something. That's why I think that I'm in a unique position to denounce these people, because they tried to kill me. They tried to send me in prison, and at the same time in a mental asylum. So, I mean, the two things are not compatible. If I wanted to do a lawsuit, I could do a lawsuit, because at one point, when I arrived in Rome, escaping from Norway, where I had been accused of espionage, and I had a case pending from the PST, the local, which is basically the local FBI in Norway, a case they gave up only in February 2010. What do you mean? I arrived in Rome after 15 years abroad in the middle of 2008 with a baggage of clothes, and all my money, everything I ever owned was frozen. All my assets were frozen. Everything was under lock in Norway. And they gave me back everything only in February 2010, when the PST finally and the Norwegian government finally lifted their accusation of espionage. That meant I didn't have any more money, nothing. And I lived for 2 years in a very difficult situation, as you can imagine, because so I think that going through these experiences, though, meant also that I am very well versed in what is happening, I think, and I have used this unique knowledge that I have, and awareness of global things, intelligence operations and whatnot. I mean, at one point I was involved in this big intelligence scandal with Japan. Benjamin Fulford arrived with all his BS, and there was a whole thing that went on regarding these Japanese with these bonds, and so all this thing arised, and everybody was like, ooh. And I remember, I mean, all kinds of things happened that I, of course, insert in my books. So I guess that my confessions want to be a mix of a biography as well as so my own personal experience, as well as the things that I learned during the time I was in the Illuminati. So going back to volume 11 and what I was saying, this is another important pick because still to this day, Thomas Crooks was talking to somebody. He was using free crypted apps, talking with people abroad. Who were they? This is important. So people understand he was not acting alone. Donald J. Trump knows that. He knows that. So I'm not saying that Trump is a saint, but he has given me an opportunity to flee Italy because persecution became even more persecution. Once in 2015, Alex Jones came to Rome and got involved with Donald J. Trump and the establishment of Italians for Trump. That was a very important move because then we managed through this organization to give Trump for his first election the support of the Italian American community. And I was the president of this organization, and you can find on Google various things also written by the mainstream news about this unique organization, which I established with other people before anybody even believed in Donald J. Trump, because he was still participating in the primaries. He was not even the candidate yet. But when they came to Rome and Alex Jones, I remember, was on the table, said, so what do you think? What should we do? I said, well, I believe that Donald J. Trump is a billionaire. You see, he can't be bought with 70 million Netflix deal like Obama or like these other politicians that go to Washington, and after they go to Washington, they're given some money from the big pharma, the military industrial complex or whatnot. And he has demonstrated with his fight, that he has demonstrated something. He has gained the respect of Vladimir Putin, that in fact, the other day in Astana said, well, I'm impressed. What he did was impressive. I mean, if you get shot and you get up and you say, fight, you are an impressive, you are like even Mark Zuckerberg said it was impressive. I mean, so this is what it means to be a real man. And we have lost I think that in this world of today, with the brainwashing and the cognitive warfare that is constantly thrown upon us, about having to accept all kinds of rubbish, men who become women and participate in women's sports, men who become women, but also women who become men and get the possibility of entering the United Grand Lodge of England, that accepts both transsexuals who are men becoming women or women becoming men. Now, women are not allowed in regular Freemasonry, but the United Grand Lodge of England, if you become formally a man, will welcome you. What kind of BS is this? What kind of rubbish is this? So I think that what I stand for at the moment as an American who has actively participated and voted for the first time in these elections as an American, I'm very proud of my vote for Donald J. Trump. Now, a lot of people, of course, will say, but then he's this, he's that, he's all the other. That is another thing that I would like to just briefly discuss with you, just because I noticed that in the so-called truth movement or conspiracy world, they never really want to give a chance to anybody to change the world and make it a better place. Now, I'm skeptic of people like, for example, Elon Musk. But I also said to the Trump team that he needed an exorcism. You know what they did? They called the biggest exorcist in the United States and they brought him in Mar-a-Lago 2 weeks ago. So things can change. People can be exorcised. people can be blessed. We can make this world a better place. But we need to understand that in doing that, we might have to, if not compromise, understand also the other part and diplomatically work together somehow. And so that's why when, for example, people say, oh, but for the Treasury, the choice of Donald Trump is on somebody who used to work for Soros. Guys, if you are working within the establishment high finance system, there is nobody who hasn't worked for George Soros in the last 30 years. I can assure you that, who is in a relevant position to understand the game and the people, because, I mean, you have big organizations that unfortunately lead always to Soros. But we can also understand that the way things have worked out in these elections can give us the possibility to finally, for example, purge forever wokeness, communism, socialism from the United States of America. That is a fact. We will purge this kind of evil. And it's evil, guys, because it's born out of the Illuminati, who are the Luciferian court of the Jesuits. This second Catholic president of the United States, this zombie we have now at the White House, who is almost triggering World War III, Joe Biden, he's a criminal who works for the Vatican, for Pope Francis, for the people who have been pushing this progressive ideology, even within the Catholic Church. There is two forces at work here. The Sabbatean Frankists that somebody just mentioned and you put on the screen, which I have profusely discussed in my books. I would suggest volume 7, but even volume 4, because there is also direct connections between the Jesuits and the Sabbatean Frankists that need to be understood. Frankist is the Jacob Frank. Jacob Frank couldn't have become who he became without the help of the Catholic Church and the Jesuits. So the role that these people have in creating the system is inevitably to, I mean, when you have the Jesuits in the last 500 years working from China to America, establishing universities that have trained thousands and thousands of leaders, well, then we need to understand that we will have to have at least a chat with these people, because they're very influential, they're very powerful. But at the moment, they are very scared of what could happen with the Trump presidency, because otherwise they will not have attempted to kill him. And I saw it with my own eyes when I was in Italy, because I used to, as you know, I used to live there. I was a Vatican correspondent for InfoWars for many years. I lived myself there, and I saw with my own eyes. They hate Donald J. Trump. The fact that I was connected with Donald J. Trump through Italians for Trump made me a target. And in fact, I was forced to flee the country. So I'm glad that we brought also these subjects up, because it's important to understand that there will always be skepticism, but we need also to have at least close with a positive note that maybe that 6-planet alignment that will manifest between the 20th and the 21st of January of this year will mean a positive change for humanity. There is, of course, a lot of things that could happen between here and Trump's installation, because Joe Biden is not really him who is piloting all this. It's Alex Soros and Barack Hussein Obama. These two people are the epitome of evil. They are the worst scumbags in the planet. These two people, together with Klaus Schwab, together with King Charles, together with the establishment that wants to give us everything and own nothing. These are the evil people. The great resetters want us to be communists so they can be the 1% in charge of everything and own everything. So I still think that in this day and age, communism, which is a product of the Jesuits and the Illuminati, and when I talk the Illuminati, I talk also about the Sabbatean Frankists that, of course, worked along with them to help their establishment. I mean, without the Rothschild, who are themselves Sabbatean Frankists, there would not have been the Illuminati and the Frankfurt School. There would not have been the development of the present-day military-industrial complex that we discussed prior at the beginning of the show, or the big pharma. All this developed within the frame of action of this establishment. And I think that the Antichrist, as somebody is, who is the Antichrist? Well, I wrote about him in volume 8 of my Confessions. It's Prince William. Prince William is there already playing the soldiers and trying to show himself powerful. The English, and it's really, I mean, I'm half British, so, and I'm even related to, as you know, to the royal family. But I know that these people are evil to the core, really evil. And that's why they want war against Russia. At one point, we, with Trump, will have to say, okay, you want this war with Russia? Germany wants to, with Scholz, keep on supporting Ukraine because they are the Fourth Reich and because Germans are still Nazis, because this is what they are, Jess. In Germany, we still find Nazis. And it's not because they are the alternative for Deutschland. No, the Nazis are the Antifas of today. They're the people who preach anti-fascism and in reality, though, they support Ukraine, which is Nazis. And where was Jacob Frank, the father of Frankism, born, Jesse? Let's see if you know that.
Where's what?
Where was Jacob Frank born? Jacob Frank, the founder of Frankism. He was a Sabbatean Frankist, but where was Jacob Frank born?
It's in Germany?
No.
Hmm.
In Ukraine.
Ukraine, fascinating because, you know, they actually, I know the Ukrainian army have the Order of the Black Star. They have a bunch of these, you know, Nazi symbols currently today under Zelensky.
And they are connected to Poland through an order which is connected to the Grand Lodge of England, United Grand Lodge of England, which is known as the Order of Saint Stanislaw, which is sponsored by Soros. And Soros, the first country which infiltrated after, actually even before the fall of the Soviet Union, was in fact Ukraine. So, of course, we are talking about now the destabilization in the last few days also of Georgia. They want to transform Georgia in the next Ukraine. But we need to resist all this temptation. That's why I'm really positive about having finally somebody with a more open mind in the White House for a second mandate. I think it was actually a blessing that Donald J. Trump didn't win in 2020. Some people, when I said in November 2020, and I remember on the Alex Jones show, let's focus on 2024, they were like, yeah, well, Roger Stone says that, but blah, 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 blah. And then they ended up going to the Capitol Hill and falling into the trap, which I described here. It was a trap. The idiots who entered the Capitol Hill on the 6th of January, including many friends, and now they ended up arrested. They ended up having their life completely ruined. I had even my friend Daryl, who had an internet radio we used to broadcast the Leo Zagami show on, who went inside the Capitol Hill, was arrested. He came out of there, and his life is completely ruined. He's homeless now. So this is, they ruined the people who went into the Capitol. I'm not saying, I hope that Trump, the first thing he does now that, of course, Joe Biden has done what he has done with his son, is to pardon all the January 6 people who unfortunately were brainwashed into going there. You know the QAnon shaman, of course, is the characteristic guy. Well, the guy went on the Alex Jones show and said, the Leo Zagami's books are the best. I follow them. He says the truth. He said it.
Yeah, we had him here on our show, and he was talking about you. I said we had you on our show, and he was really excited that you were on our show. So he knows you, likes you, and respects you.
No, because I was the one who warned the people even the week before the Capitol Hill thing. I went on Alex, I think it was the Alex Jones show, or was the War Room with Owen, I don't remember now, but I just went there and I said, guys, don't go. It's a trap. It's not. I said to Owen, I remember, Owen Schroyer, don't believe in what you are seeing. This is a trap. And you know how many people from the Proud Boys and other groups are still thanking me today because they didn't go there that day under my advice. Their lives are better. They were not arrested, they were not persecuted, and they're living a good life. I remember the head of the Denver chapter of the Proud Boys still thanking me because I told them not to go there. It was a trap. People fall for it. Now let's turn this page, this sad page. The FBI was involved in it. I hope that this new nominee as head of the FBI will really transform the J. Edgar Hoover Center into a museum of the deep state, because the FBI needs to be reformed. The DOJ needs to be reformed. The CIA needs to be reformed. Every single federal agency needs to be reformed, because the deep state and the Jesuits and the Sabbateans have basically done everything possible to subvert the interests of the American people. And I'm glad that now we have a second Trump presidency in 2024 and not in 2020, because now Trump has much more experience. Trump has actually a cabinet with very diverse, with people like Tulsi Gabbard, people like RFK Jr., who will declare war from day one to the big pharma. We are living in unprecedented times here in the United States, and I think this is great. I mean, to see Justin Trudeau, that little weasel, all scared, coming to Mar-a-Lago. Oh, well, you're not going to act? 25% tariff. We're going to bankrupt you, Canada. Canada wants to be a little bit more. The proposal was there and it's still there. You want to become the 51st state of America? That's fine. But you're not going to get our money anymore in the way you're getting it now. You can become the 31st state, the 51st state of America. That's the solution. And that's what Trump proposed to Trudeau. And Trudeau was like, read. You can laugh, idiot. That's how it is. So I think it's a great proposal. I would suggest that you should make Canada great again. Give up on your allegiance to the Queen of England or the King of England. Oh, yeah, you are no longer a credible country. You are becoming a threat, and so we act, according to that. Either you act accordingly, or it's 25% tariff. And of course, that is going to bankrupt your country, because Canada is completely dependent on the United States of America, just as Mexico is. Mexico is a country, unfortunately, in the hands of the Jesuits, who control the cartels, and is a socialist hellhole that needs to be completely reformed. So I hope that we can make gradually all this, but very difficult, especially when in South America you have so much Jesuitry. It is one of the headquarters of the Jesuits. The head of the Jesuits, the present Black Pope of the Jesuit, is a Venezuelan. You say, we talk about Venezuelan gangs here in America. Well, we have a gangster heading in Borgo Santo Spirito, the Company of Jesus. And then you have a Pope from Argentina, another gangster. So I hope that we can bring the world to a new realization that this evil needs to finish, and we need to be positive about the outcome of a future Trump presidency. If not, by 2030, we will all be under the control of China, and you can forget your freedom. You can be microchipped and be part of the mark of the beast. That's it. So I think I made it very clear for your viewers. And I hope that we can have instead 4 years to look forward to, in which we can make not only America, but the whole world great again. And thank you for having me on as usual, Jess.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And, we are going to see, where Trump and his loyalties lie, because if he does get in, if he does pardon the J6ers, if Kash Patel does actually, make that into a museum, and, if weeds out all the corruption, if RFK is really going to, have an attack on the pharmaceutical industry, because a lot of people say a lot of things. But when it comes to actually doing something against this big bad beast, when it comes to doing something, it seems like people don't, they have good intentions, but either they don't know what they're up against, the beast, or it's too powerful, or, they just say what they want people to hear in order for it to appease the people. And, they possibly going into this digital currency enslavement. And, Trump is part of that kind of whole thing. So we're definitely going to see he's got a chance to redeem himself from, the injections.
I think even Kennedy has a Trump to redeem his own family legacy, because of course, his father was killed, his uncle was killed, and there was, of course, the deep state behind it. But at the same time, they were also in course with a lot of wrong doings that the CIA did at the time. So the Kennedys have definitely had a bad karma that infected the whole family. So I hope that RFK Jr. does the right thing. I also know what you're saying. Will they deliver rather than only talk? Will they do the work? And so we all sit down and see what happens here. And there is people, of course, who say, but they sustain Israel. Well, my friends, regarding Israel, for those who still haven't read volume 10, which you have now, no? I hope you have read this book, because it's very important to read, especially the last chapter dedicated to the Sabbatean Frankists. Guys, you need to study the history of Israel, because it's important to understand where all this Middle East chaos, Joe Biden now, before leaving the White House, is setting the house on fire, both with the long-range missiles to Russia, both with these insurgents who are Al-Qaeda operatives in Syria. We need to understand that Hamas is a product of the Muslim Brotherhood, and so has been under the control of NATO. And before that, it was under the control of Great Britain. The United Kingdom founded the Freemasons of Great Britain helped the foundation of the Muslim Brotherhood. This is history, it's not speculation. Israel is, of course, occupying land because they were persecuted all over Europe. So it's a question of history. You persecute them in Germany, you persecute them before that in Russia. In Russia, there were the pogroms. You persecute them all over Europe. You don't give them a chance. And in the end, the Sabbatean Frankists pushed them towards Israel, because that's what happened. Sabbatai Zevi, the founder of the Sabbateans, his father worked for Great Britain, for the United Kingdom. That's where he got the idea of bringing back all the tribes of Israel to Israel. And that's what led to the birth of Zionism in the first place. But Zionism can be interpreted as nationalism or as labor Zionism, which is the problem, which is the leftist problem that unfortunately pervades still to this day Israel. So it's obvious that somebody let the failure happen on the 7th of November. So they could then start attacking Netanyahu and maybe get him out of the place. But now, with Trump, you're going to see a very simple thing. And he has given already the announcement yesterday. I received it from his press office. And he has given it on Truth Social. If Hamas doesn't release those hostages, you're going to see what happens to mercenaries of the New World Order. Because Hamas are mercenaries, and whoever has compassion for those mercenaries who instigate young kids to kill Israelis from when they are in school, they brainwash them. In my book, I explain my time in the Middle East. I explain my time with the Muslims, and I explain how my former wife was also brought when she was very young, 10 years old, to watch videos so she could be programmed to hate the Jews. And you want to support that kind of scam? Sorry, guys, you need to understand. If we persecuted the Jews in Europe, we have a responsibility. The responsibility, first of all, for the Balfour Treaty goes to Great Britain, doesn't go to America. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was done between France and England in 1916. I always say, study history, and then we can talk. Because knowing the past, you can write maybe a better future. Don't you think so, Jess?
100%.
I hope. And I hope that we can all live in peace in the future. But to live in peace in the future, we have to understand our failures. When the Turks, the Turkish Ottoman Empire came down, who brought it down? Because for 800 years, Muslims, Jews, Christians lived in peace in the land that we call Israel or Palestine, however you want to call it. Then suddenly things went the other way around. But who fomented the fall of, and I explained that in this book, Great Britain, the founded lodges all over the Middle East, and France founded Freemason lodges all over the Middle East and Turkey, and they fomented and they managed to corrupt the Ottoman Caliphate that fell in 1921 because of Great Britain, because of France, in particular the United Grand Lodge of England. So everybody knows that Ataturk was a Sabbatian Frankist, a Domme. So the founder of modern Turkey is part of the problem. If you say something like this in Turkey, they arrest you, though. You can't talk about Ataturk in the wrong way. Oh, no, Ataturk, the Young Turks. The Young Turks were founded in a lodge in Salonico, guys. Study your history so you understand that we are being all brought for a ride in the end times, but in the end, hopefully, the Messiah, call him the Messiah, call him whatever you want, will be able, hopefully, to put all this mess together and then establish 1,000 years of peace. And I really hope that will happen.
Me too. Well, thank you so much for coming back here on our show. If you could please lift up your book, tell
Yes,
people where they can get it, and tell people just one last time what they can find in the book.
Yes, I think that the cover really describes it all. You have Thomas Crooks here on the cover. You have also on the other side Lee Harvey Oswald. You have at the same time here Sun Tzu, The Art of War. You have the guy, the first civilian director of the Central Intelligence Agency. You have the symbols of the psychological operations as well as the CIA. This is the brain, the war on your brain is the subject basically of this book. 11, like the Twin Towers, you see? 11 that looks like the Twin Towers. And this is the past, present, or future of mind control, from Sun Tzu to MK Ultra and beyond. Volume 11 of my confessions you can find now on Amazon, or you can find the link at leozagami.com together with my latest articles. And thank you so much for having me on at The Missing Link. It's always a pleasure. And happy Christmas if you don't speak. Happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas to you as well. Thank you again. It's always informing, and it's great to hear your thoughts on how things are going on in the world. So thanks again.
Somebody said here, sorry, Zagami, I am of Jewish descent, and you're wrong. We are programmed to hate the Palestinians. We are programmed on both sides to hate each other. We need to get that program to actually hack that program and finally get rid of that hate on both sides. On both sides, I think that hating both for the Israeli as well as for the other side is all wrong. Remember, I make an example here. Gaza now is the place that everybody sees in the news, all the people that die. If we go back 800, 900 years ago, during the Crusades, Gaza was lived prevalently by Christians and Jews. When the Muslims arrived with their fierce army of Saladin and murdered everybody, the Templars could only bring in their fortress in Gaza only a few people because they didn't have the space. They were slaughtered, and they were Christian and Jews. Now the same thing is happening to Muslims. Well, karma is a bitch, guys. I'm sorry. It happens. And once you realize that, we can come to a mutual discussion that we all have our failures, and we might all, at this point, find a common solution. And that is the Abrahamic Accords 2.0 that is coming together for the second Trump presidency.
We definitely need peace in this world. No more war. Bring all the troops home. I think if all the troops go back to their own countries, everybody takes care of their own, works on their own infrastructure, I think those are some of the things that we need. But I want to thank everybody here in our audience. We've got around 300 people here live with us right now. Thanks to everybody. Leo put it on his YouTube channel and also on his Twitter. So for all the people there, we are the Missing Link Live. We're live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and Rumble on our channels, and then on YouTube for Leo and Twitter for Leo. Right now, we have had 6 YouTube channels deleted for the Missing Link Live. We have our 7th channel on 2-week ban right now, so we're just on our backup High Vibe Love Tribe channel. But please find us, subscribe to us.
I
We do
want to give you
interviews.
some good news, Jess.
Yeah.
Some of those channels you will be able to recover now. Try to connect with YouTube because I was able to get back 2 of my channel. One that was removed in October 2020 and the other one in January 2022. And I got them immediately after the elections because things are changing at YouTube and they're very scared of what will come up with the second Trump presidency. So try to appeal the decisions for your channels and you're going to get them back.
Okay, well, that would be great because we had over 20,000 subscribers on our YouTube that we got lost, or we're at around 50,000 subscribers on all of our different channels. So thanks everybody for all your likes, comments, hearts, shares, and stars. We appreciate all of your love and support. Confessions of Illuminati. We've got Leo's books, leozagami.com. You can check him out there. For all the people that are on Rumble or on Facebook, think about, maybe subscribing to our channel, helping us out, in this fight to bring the information to, the masses, because knowledge is power. And the more knowledge we all have collectively, the less power they have over us. For one love, one heart, one life. Namaste, everyone. And if they ever ask you to put on a breathing inhibitor again, Leo, you know what to say. No maske. Okay, bye everyone. Bye, Leo. We'll see you next time we see you back here on The Missing Link.